good evening, or good morning. This is an intro to the channel. What's the channel all about? What do we do here? I have a couple words that I use in my elevator pitch. The first word is minoritarian. The second phrase would be tripartite class system. I think those are probably the most important ones. You might think of some more as we go along here. But minoritarian essentially states that society is not about majorities. That is the story of democracy that we're told. I think increasingly people are adopting narratives of a democracy which are inherently contradictory and convoluted and don't make sense, and that have never really made sense. America was originally founded as a republic. Voting rights were restricted. Voting rights, in a sense, continue to be restricted in the sense that power is always held by dedicated minorities. That's how civilizations are founded. Civilizations were founded on slavery. You might not like that. You might think civilization is inherently evil because it was founded on slavery. But that is the essence and the nature of civilization, that you have these power imbalances, that there is a group of people who are the masses, and they are controlled by powerful people. Now, how they are controlled is a big question mark, and that's where I get into the tripartite class system. I say there are three classes of power: the warrior, the priest, and the merchant. And that these three different types have different psychological incentives. So for the warrior is looking for victory and glory primarily. The priest is looking for the question of why, the question of the truth, the question of God, and ultimately the priest is often functioning as the one who takes society and brings people together and mediates complicated abstractions. And the merchant is dealing with, you've already created a society, now you have a currency, you have the concept of debt, you have the concept of interest, you have all these abstractions, and the merchant is a middleman. So whereas the warrior is having a direct confrontation, problem solving, engineering, the priest is engaging in philosophy and religion. The merchant really just purely cares about money. So these are three psychological types with three different kinds of incentives. There are some people who will do anything for money. There are some people for whom money doesn't really matter to them. They'd rather be homeless. There's some people you could offer them a job and they say, no, I'd rather be homeless. There are some people who have the option between making more money or maybe being a philosopher, or maybe they've got a gambling addiction. A gambling addiction is not necessarily, or other forms of addictions, these are not necessarily the way that you make a lot of money, say an addiction to playing video games or something. This would not be the optimal way to make money, but maybe you're just a very competitive person. You set a goal for yourself, like beating a video game, and that to you is more important than having money. So these are the three psychological types, and depending on the dominance of one type over the other two, or the submission of a certain type, it's going to change the way that people are ruled. So if you live in a warrior-based society, it's ruled through competence hierarchies, dominance hierarchies, masculinity, violence. And so it's basically going to be a society ruled by frat boys and the military and the police. And it's going to be a tribal society. It's going to be a society where strong men get the girl and weak men are kicked to the curb and they're made submissive. It's a society where jocks shove nerds into lockers. Now, you may think that's very immoral, but that's what it looks like. And there's a lot of violence in a warrior-led society. It is not a peaceful society, and it's not always a just society. You know, sometimes you look in ancient Scandinavia, you could just kill somebody and take their stuff, right? So it is not always a society of justice, but it's a society of rule by strength. That doesn't mean it's an individualistic society either. It's very collectivistic and conformist, and it has its own mores and authoritarianism. So it's not a free society, but it has a certain type of rule. It has a certain way that people are ruled. Historically, these have been agricultural societies, societies where the warrior's on top and other people have to follow. You have the priestly society, the theocratic society, and we can see this in terms of cults, you know, little cults. Academia is an example of this type of power structure, the priestly power structure, where those who are versed in dogma and doctrine are at the top. You could say Sigmund Freud created a priest class of psychotherapists and psychoanalysts. You get these little Karl Marx, you know, he created a priest class of political theorists. And that's what a priestly structure looks like, whether you call it religious or not. Some people who are narrow-minded Christians, I've found, don't like the way that I use the term priest class, because to them a priest class means an Orthodox Christian or a nice person or a person who is just. It's not necessarily what the term priest class means. If you think there's a better term, you can make a suggestion, but I probably won't listen. Then you have the merchant class, and a society ruled by money is basically what we have now, where the merchant class dominates both the priest and warrior class. And so warriors become not just warriors, but now they are mercenaries. And you don't just have priests, but now you have scientists, right? You have a priest which is trapped in a metaphysics of materialism, which is centered around, of course, the mercantile conception of the world, which has material and quantity, that everything can be broken down into quantities, because that's what money is. Money is the ultimate liquid quantity that can absorb and dissolve all material assets and quantify the world. So priests are forced into the role of being the scientist. That's the domination of the merchant. So we're always going to have minoritarian domination of majorities. If you look at a bell curve on any chart, whether it's intelligence or sociality or discipline, you're always going to have bell curves. You're always going to have most people are in the middle. Most people are mediocre. Most people are average. That's just how traits work, right? Excellence is always rare. Mediocrity is common. And as it turns out, whenever we have any sort of competition, being extremely good, being an extremely high quality person is always rare, just as a matter of course. There's really no way to eliminate this. You could call it a problem of inequality. There's no real way to eliminate this without enforcing some kind of extreme genetic homogeneity. So if you have a bunch of twins, then you would sort of soften the bell curve, because if everyone is genetically identical, then I suppose, you know, you could have a society which is more majoritarian. Majoritarian meaning authentically democratic, a society where there's not a small elite which controls everything. Everyone's on the same page. People treat each other fairly, like family, more egalitarian society. You could say a society like Japan or Iceland or Scandinavia or something like that, although that's changing as time goes on. And I would argue that even these societies, especially Japan, still minoritarian societies. At the end of the day, they have their own priest, warrior, merchant class. But smaller communities, more homogeneous, they do tend more toward the majoritarian ideal, which some people have a moral preference for this ideal, the majoritarian society. Obviously, this is beneficial for the warrior class where they want uniformity, organization. You think of the Apache, where every man would be a warrior. There was no warrior class, it was every man was a warrior. That's an example of this kind of majoritarian thinking, although the Apache may have had their own minoritarian structures besides that, such as the shaman, who was part of a priest class who was separate from the rest of Apache society. In any case, the minoritarian ideal is that you say we're not going to be able to convert everyone in society to be like us. Therefore, we have to be separate from the rest of society. So you see this in Judaism, you see this in Mormonism, you see this with the Amish, you see this with any type of group that sees itself as separate. And so within a minority, you need to have a class structure, and you need to have class cooperation. You need to have methods of mediation between the classes, where the priest class will deal with science and academics and religion, and the warrior class is going to deal with the policing, the military, engineering. And then you're going to have a merchant class, which deals with banking and finance and merchandising. And you're going to have a balance. Now, different groups are going to construct a balance in response to their environment, and they're going to change their environment with respect to their class ideal, what they believe is the ideal class structure. So a group like the Quakers or the Shakers might say, well, we don't want a warrior class because war is bad. And so they would try to eliminate their warrior class in favor of the other classes, primarily a priest class. But other classes, other minoritarians, such as the Sikhs, might say, no, we need to have a warrior class first and foremost that should dominate the other classes. You could have a group which says merchandising is the most important thing. Let's say you have a group who comes from a country and their strategy is to buy up a bunch of gas stations and hotels and 7-Elevens and to purely pursue a strategy of trying to make as much money as possible, not involving themselves with church building or religious proselytizing or military matters, but simply trying to buy up businesses and cooperate nepotistically to make money. That would be a mercantile strategy. So we can look at these different strategies, and we can look individually in ourselves and ask ourselves, how do we fit into these strategies? I don't believe there's a one-size-fits-all. I don't think that everybody can be forced to be a merchant. I don't think everyone can be forced to be a priest or a warrior. I think we all have tendencies. Now, the immediate question that people ask me is, does this mean that these are absolute, that I have to be one category or another? No. Ultimately, these are drives in the same way that I have a drive for stability. I want my life to be stable, regular, and familiar, but I also have a drive for change and novelty. Now, that leads me into the next thing that I forgot to mention in the introduction, which is the concept of left versus right. Basically, and there's many ways to describe left versus right. There's conventional, superficial ways, like the right wing wants low taxes, the left wing wants high taxes. Okay, well, I think that's a very superficial way of describing it. I think a much better way to describe the left-right divide is that the right wants things to remain the same, the left wants things to change. And so I think that this is a much deeper perspective of the left-right dichotomy, which originally comes from the French Revolution, that the right wing wanted to keep the monarchy, the left wing wanted a new republic, wanted a new system of government. So I describe myself as a deep leftist, meaning that the system as we have it now is deeply flawed. It needs to be changed via a minoritarian strategy. That is, I'm not interested in pursuing some kind of conventional party politics where I infiltrate the Republican Party or the Democrat Party and I become a functionary, and that's the whole, and that could be part of it, maybe. That could be part of it. But the idea that we're going to change things through the democratic process, I think, is wrong-headed. I think you gain power first, and then from a position of power, you have the ability to change politics. But I don't think you you use politics as a vector to gain power. I think that's the complete opposite. And I think that's really makes a lot of it silly. I think it makes Trump silly. I think it makes Bernie silly. I think a lot of these movements that people invest time and energy in are silly. Now, maybe they're driven by good intentions for moral reasons, but I think ultimately the idea that you're going to change the country by electing a president is silly. I think the important thing is to have lobbying power, to either have a good foothold in the military, in the media, or in money. These are the three classes: military, warrior class, media, priest class, or money is the merchant class. So you have to have one of those three, or preferably all three, in order to affect politics. You can try really hard to get somebody elected, but if you have the military, the media, and money all against you, it doesn't matter how many votes you cast for somebody. They'll get impeached, or they'll get assassinated, or something. It doesn't matter how many votes you get with your majoritarian strategy, with populism. In terms of populism, I think that is a failed concept in many ways. I think what we've seen in the 20th century is that people can be made to believe anything. So Germans can be convinced of a monarchy, of a democracy, of communism, of right-wing extremism, of, Christian socialism, of Christian conservatism, free market economics, capitalism. And that's just Germany, right? We could take any European state or many different countries and find the same thing, that they do not have a natural inclination. Now, people have interests, right? People don't want to be hurt. People don't want to be harmed. But the ideological system that informs them of what is harm and what is not is extremely variable, because these things are so abstract that they are not immediate. And so people can be taught to love communism. They can be taught to hate communism. This is part of a religious framework that's taken on dogma and doctrine that most people never investigate. Most people are ignorant of. And most dogmatists and doctrinaires themselves have very poor reasoning put into their faith. Faith ultimately comes from Latin fides, fidelis, meaning to have fidelity, loyalty to a thing, to a concept, to a person. And this has nothing to do with rationality, has nothing to do with intelligence. It simply has to do with the fact that in order to perceive the world, we need certain axiomatic principles to work from. We have to have a model of the world. Some people would call this a metaphysics or a metapolitics or values or assumptions. We need to walk around the world and have a heuristic for how we're going to deal with really complicated, complex things. We can't always take the time to say, I'm going to, take this very complex situation and collect all the data possible and create a formula and a theory. And anytime someone challenges it, I'm going to have to stop for hours or days or years and study the problem. No, we simply have to make assumptions and move on with our lives. We live in a very politically tribalistic time, which I would also say is a religiously tribalistic time. I think the lines between politics and religion are very, very thin. And I think most people who are atheists are extremely religious because they're extremely political. There is a certain faction of these people who are individualists. Now, I make videos having to do with self-help, getting out of the house, making connections. I do not believe that individuals are capable of much of anything. I think there are certain people out there who I describe as geniuses, who may have the ability to, quote-unquote, do things on their own, although even that I would question from a perspective of linguistics, that language is never something that is individual. Mathematics is not something that's come up by the individual. All languages and reference or systems of symbology are created collectively, and therefore I don't believe in individualism. This is something that I think distinguishes me from most conservatives, and why I would describe myself as a deep leftist is because I think this is something that's very strong in American conservatism, which is being exported to Europe. The concept of the free market, the individual, I don't believe in it. I don't believe that the individual is capable of much of anything. And I think what makes a person a genius is their ability to impact the lives of others. I think the reason we're on this planet Earth as a social species, as an individual in a social species, is to make an impact in the lives of other people. And that to me is the meaning of love. The meaning of love is not to give people free stuff. The meaning of love is not to be kind or nice. The meaning of love is to make an impact in people's lives that ultimately is for the good. And the good is not always the easy, and the good is not always non-confrontational, and the good is not always the motherly thing to do. Sometimes the good means, pushing the bird out of the nests and, forcing it to fly. Sometimes the good is exposing someone to challenge and harsh elements. But the good is what's needed for our personal growth to help us have a clearer picture and a clearer path toward what is our ideal. And I believe different individuals are going to have different ideals. Some people, that's going to be a warrior, priest, or merchant ideal, and it's going to manifest differently in different cultures. But we all need to have a clearer picture of who we are, who we want to become, and how we're going to get there. And that process is often impeded by lies and deceptions. And so a lot of people will say, I'm a warrior, I'm a hero. And you look at this person, you say, you're a nerd, you're weak. You could get stronger, right? You could maybe do some physical training. You're never going to be a U.S. Marine. You see these people sometimes, these really weak nerds walking around in military uniforms and pretending to be associated with the military. And you say, drop the act. This is a falsehood. This is a self-deception, maybe because your father wanted you to be this way, your grandfather was this way. We can't allow our admiration of other people to obscure the truth of who we are. We have different dispositions, either because of our nature or nurture. That's basically irrelevant. At a certain point, our childhood is over, and it's time for us to confront the fact that the brain has limited plasticity, the body has limited plasticity, the brain is related to the body. These things are all connected. You can't simply be whoever you want to be at some point. You have to acknowledge you have certain strengths and certain weaknesses. You can work on your weaknesses. You can improve your strengths. But you have to deal with the cards that you have. If you're a really smart person, you're going to have to use that intelligence. You're going to have to put it to work. If you're not so smart, you're going to have to find something else you're good at. Maybe you're not very intelligent classically. You're not good at math, or you're not really good with words, but maybe you're good with music. Maybe you can talk to people. Maybe you're an extrovert. Maybe you're a good people person. You can network. Or maybe you're an artist. Maybe you're really good with craftsmanship. Maybe you can paint things. Maybe you have a good eye for detail. Maybe you're just meticulous. Maybe you're disciplined. Maybe you don't have any special talents, but if I tell you to do something and I leave you alone for 12 hours, you'll spend those 12 hours doing what you were told to do. A lot of people can't do that. Maybe you're someone who's really good with internal motivation, meaning that you don't need someone standing over your shoulder all the time saying, do this, do that, do the other. You're kind of a self-starter. Maybe you're externally motivated. Maybe you need other people to constantly tell you what to do, to encourage you, and so on. So these are important things to know. And as I talk about these things, the relation of the self to society, to identity, a lot of people think, oh, you're talking about self-help. You're basically Jordan Peterson. As I said before, I think one of the distinguishing factors of Jordan Peterson as this kind of moderate conservative is he's very much into the free market and into individualism, and I don't buy into that. I think in order to be complete as an individual, you need other people. You need a sense of your ancestry, your heritage, your history, which I do not believe is racial. That's another thing that distinguishes me from increasingly the attitudes on the right wing and what I would call the superficial left, or the billionaire left. Some people call it the woke left. These are people who increasingly have a victimary ideology which I call the religion of racial resentment. They're going around and they're resenting certain races on account of perceived racial victimization. I don't buy into this. I think it is a religious dogma, a doctrine that is axiomatic. It's unfalsifiable. It doesn't hold up to rational evidence. It's simply a religious faith. And I don't buy into it. It's not my religion. I don't hold it to be sacred. I don't think we should hate people on the basis of these racial theories. And I don't identify with a race. I don't think that hating people of a race makes my life better. And I also don't think identifying as a certain race makes my life better, because just because I have the same skin color as someone doesn't mean they're going to run to my rescue. Rather, I believe what's important is that we have religious identities. Now I'm going to move on to a question that has been asked many times before. Are you a Christian? Many people assume that I am a Christian. Many people assume I am not a Christian. Many people ask if I'm a Christian. To me, the term Christian is a box, and it means different things to different people. And so if I put myself in that box, people will say, well, if you're a Christian, you have to hate paganism. If you're a Christian, you have to be Catholic. That's a real Christian. Or if you're a Christian, you have to be Baptist. If you're a Christian, you have to be Orthodox. This is what it means to be a real Christian. And if you call yourselves a Christian, but you're not in my smaller box, within that bigger box, then you're in the zone of the fake Christian. And to a lot of people, being a fake Christian is worse than being a real Christian. And I actually understand that, and I sympathize with that position. Although, as I'm describing it, you can see my irritation with the whole process. But I do believe that if one were to be a real Christian, if one were to describe oneself as a Christian, one would have a duty to wear that label loudly and proudly. And I have read the Bible, and I do take it seriously. Verses like, be hot or cold, but not lukewarm. Currently on a road trip, and I'll give an example of this attitude. I've had people offer me the world, say, you can come stay with me, we'll do all these activities, I have everything planned out months in advance. All of a sudden I say, I'm coming next week, and they say, sorry, I have to cancel. That to me is this kind of, lukewarmness. If you offer someone all those things, if you put on this display and you represent a certain way, you should follow through. And if you don't follow through, you better have a good excuse. To me, that is when you overpromise, when you put on yourself a label of Christian, and you don't really measure up to that. That to me is really, really bad. That is a form of a really bad hypocrisy. Now, in terms of hypocrisy, I will admit I am a hypocrite in the sense that I advocate for certain things where I know certain things to be good and true, and I don't always follow through on those things. So, for instance, I will say something like, it is good to not just think of yourself. It is good to not just do what feels good in the moment. It is good to stray away from addicting things. It is good to live thoughtfully. It is good to, not to do things which are bad. If there's a cookie in front of you and you know that the cookie's not going to make you feel better in the long run, might taste good in the short run, you should stay away from the cookie. I don't always take that advice, but I'll give that advice because it's true. I believe it is better to be a hypocrite. I believe it's better to point toward an ideal which is good, even if you don't follow it yourself, than to say, well, I'm not perfect, therefore, what can I can't really tell you anything. This is a conflict that I have. This is a conflict that I have over the issue of hypocrisy. Where does it become egregious in terms of, being a total hypocrite versus making the perfect the enemy of the good? I have a problem with that, and I struggle with that. So that's something that we discuss on the channel. Now, I guess I haven't really answered the question fully to people's liking, to people's desire. I've tried to answer it many times, but ultimately, at the end of the day, It's something I'm working on, and it's something we're all working on. I would frame my understanding of... I just knocked a plant over. I would frame my understanding of Christianity in terms of an understanding of religious progression. I just stomped my foot with this plant. It's a lopsided plant. Let me tell you something. This is a lopsided plant. So anyway, I would frame my my understanding of religion within two people, or two general things. I'm going to mention Jean Gebser, and I'm going to mention Zoroastrianism. So Jean Gebser has the concept of three structures of consciousness. The first one being the magical, the second being the mythical, and the third being the mental. So the magical consciousness structure is sort of like animism. Everything is magical. The stream and the rocks, and it's very much about the body. Okay. Then you have the mythical. And the mythical is, we're beyond, worshiping rocks and streams and stuff. Now we have gods. It's the myth of the heroes, the gods, the great men of history. And then as you're moving from the mythical to the mental, what happens is the gods become more and more abstracted to the point where the concept of the heroic is removed from being imbued within certain archetypes, and now it becomes a singular concept of the good. And the good becomes God, not the gods as these great men of history, these myths and heroes, but no, it's the good in the abstract, the good, the most high. And we start to get monotheism. And this progresses over time to the point where we get atheism, where you say, we're not even going to talk about God at all. We're just going to talk about the good in itself as a pure concept. And we're not even going to talk about God. That would be anthropocentric. And so you can see how these stages progress. Is this necessarily a good thing or a bad thing? But we see we're going basically from the body, from eros in the magical consciousness structure, the erotic religious structure of paganism, animism, where it's basically the worship of sexuality in one way or another. And then you move up to the mythical, where sort of sexuality is now repressed in some way or controlled within a mythic structure, through polytheism and polytheistic marriage, right? Marriage was not invented by Christians, it was invented by pagans. And then you eventually have a progress from paganism to monotheism, and from monotheism to atheism. And that is from the eros all the way to the thumos of the hero, and then from the thumos into the mens, into the mind, and into the mental, and eventually to the abstract, the calculative. And you can see this is the progress from the warrior into the priest and into the merchant. So the tripartite system here is very important. So that's the Jean Gebser view of things. Then you also have the Zoroastrians. So what's happening now with the religion of racial resentment? It's doing the same thing to Christianity that Christianity did to Judaism, that Judaism did to Zoroastrianism. Most people who believe in Judaism believe that Judaism is the first religion, and that it's perfect, and it didn't come from anywhere. It's the first religion. I don't believe this. I believe that Judaism comes from a religion called Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism was an Indo-European religion from Iran, from Persia. I believe that ancient civilizations had a lot of migration, that, for instance, today we would describe Syrians and Iraqis and Egyptians and Moroccans and Saudi Arabians and all these people as Arabs because they speak Arabic. But the Arabic expansion did not happen until the 7th century AD, and that prior to this, the Middle East was a very different place. The Middle East has had a lot of different migrations, and it's had a lot of different changes. And so ancient Persia was different from how it is today, and it was one of the most important civilizations, to the point where the Persians, known as the Parthians, had many wars with the Romans, and the Romans could never defeat them. There's a myth of Rome that Rome conquered the known world. This is a flat-out lie. They knew all about Parthia, and they were never able to conquer the Parthians. And so the Parthians and the Romans would go back and forth having these wars, because the Romans and the Parthians were pretty much equal. They were pretty much equal in terms of their military power, in terms of their culture and their civilization. They were fairly in the same way, at least comparable today would be like China and America. You know, some ways that you could say China's better, some ways America's better. Not a value judgment, but just in terms of military power, economic power. So the Persians were a very competent people for a very long time, and they came up with this religion of Zoroastrianism. And every time you had a religious development, you have what's called a spiritual patricide. That is, every time you have a new religion, it pretends that the religion it came out of is fake and false and evil. And this is something that Zoroastrianism did. It said the devas are evil. Now, devas, if you know the Devis in Hinduism, these are the gods, okay? So Hinduism was what we think of as Hinduism in the Bhagavad Gita, the polytheistic system of Hinduism. This was the original religion of Iran. But Zoroaster, the prophet, came along and he said, we're going to reject Hinduism. We're going to reject the polytheistic system. We're going to embrace a monolatric system. We're going to worship a god known as Ahura Mazda, which basically means the progressive mentality. And we're going to reject Angra Mainyu, which means the regressive idea. And he even sounds angry, Angra Mainyu. So we're going to embrace Ahura Mazda, the god of light, the god of progress. And this is basically where monotheism originates. A lot of the myths, the flood myth, right? Where does that come from? Well, about 10,000 years ago, the Black Sea, in the basically the Ur-Heimat, or the original homeland of the Indo-European peoples, 10,000 years ago, flooded. So from the Mediterranean basin, it flooded into the Black Sea. This is probably the origin of the flood myth. The origin of Samson, the character of Samson, probably comes from Hercules, or at least a proto-Hercules. So basically everything in Judaism has some kind of Indo-European origin. A lot of people will say that Christianity is a form of a Semitic culture entering into Europe, but they neglect to understand the history of Judaism as an Indo-European incursion into the Middle East, or at least from Persia into the Levant. This is why I believe that Judaism is so obsessed with separation and meaning a separation from other peoples, not marrying other peoples, having distinct rituals, circumcision, much in the same way that the Brahmin tried to maintain themselves in India. I believe the original purpose of Judaism was to maintain a population separate from those other Levantine peoples. Eventually, over time, Judaism evolved and changed to the point where we get rabbinical Judaism, Reform Judaism, and many offshoots. During the time of Christ, you had the distinction between those who were Pharisees and those who were Sadducees, right? So different factions within Judaism. But I think basically what Zoroastrianism did to Hinduism, and what Judaism did to Zoroastrianism, and what Christianity did to Judaism, and what, atheism and secularism did to Christianity, we're having that again with what you would call the religion of racial resentment. That previously America was based on George Washington, the Founding Fathers, and Constitution. Now all that's evil. It's evil, and it's wrong, because we resent the race of people that created the country. I don't believe in that, but that is the new religion, and that is a religion that's fanatical. And what people don't understand about fanatical religions is they've happened before. The early kind of understanding of this idea, I think, was expressed by some people as the new Puritanism, that the religion of racial resentment, which is funded by what I call the billionaire left, right? All these academic institutions that are funded by billionaires, They put out this religion of racial resentment. People call it the New Puritanism because they want to burn the old books. They want to create safe spaces, exclusive spaces. They want to smash old statues. They want to riot in the cities. So they call this is a puritanical attitude. And there's something to that. It is a fanatical religious movement. This is important to understand because a lot of people say that society is becoming more secular. The problem for me with the terms like secularity or nihilism or individualism is I think these are basically placeholder terms for the amorphous period of transition between two religious authorities. So previously we had a Christian society, then because of atheism and secularism and scientism, we sort of lost that binding glue that gave us a sense of authority and centralization. Now what's happened is the billionaire class is promoting this concept of the religion of racial resentment. The question is, why would they do that? Well, the Neuroposter channel has a great video called Why Would Corporate America Go Woke, which I think is a pretty good summary of the dynamic, where essentially the religion of racial resentment is a great way to distract from the economic disempowerment of the average American and people around the world, to say that the real struggle for social justice has nothing to do with a living wage, a single parent income supporting a family, has nothing to do with the rising cost of college, has nothing to do with inflation, has nothing to do with the concentration of wealth in the hands of billionaires. None of that matters. What matters is microaggressions. What matters is, these little cultural ambiguities, these unfalsifiable feelings, how people feel, that this history that's always being uncovered of the evil founding of the country and colonialism, imperialism. Not to say that bad things didn't happen, but just to say that this is being used very cynically. I also believe that essentially the elites and the billionaires don't really care about the people who are supposedly the victims in this situation, the people who are being oppressed. I don't think they really care, and I believe they're willing to switch the script. I believe that if things get bad enough, things become intolerable enough, they're willing to flip the script. And we've already seen this in Ukraine, where people like George Soros, the United States State Department, and the Israeli government are willing to support radical right-wing terrorism in Ukraine because these radical Ukrainian nationalists serve as a bulwark against Russia. So in this geopolitical struggle, they're willing to support right-wing extremism in order to thwart the territorial ambitions of Russia, justified or unjustified, whatever. I'm not really a pro-Russia person. I believe Russia is an extremely degenerate state. It's got extremely high rates of alcoholism, abortion, divorce, you name it. The churches are empty for the most part. The pictures you see are photo ops. They're fake. It's about as fake as North Korea. I don't think that Russia is a vital culture. I think many of its young people are leaving. I think many of its young people don't believe in Russia. They're pessimistic. I believe that many young Russians are as pessimistic about Russia as young Americans are pessimistic about America. I don't think that Russia has a positive birth rate. I think most of its births are coming from the Muslims in its country. Russia is about 10% Muslim, which is equivalent to France. A lot of people will tell you, oh, France is a degenerate country because, look, they can't have babies. The Muslims are having all the babies. Well, it's actually the same basically for Russia, maybe to a lesser extent, but Russia's along the same track. That's another point we make on this channel a lot, and I'll extend that to Islam. Islam is not a solution to the problems of the West. And the reason why is because we have to look at not just cultural distance, but cultural velocity. What I mean is you can construct a timeline, and you can say, well, in 1700, this was the birth rate of France. In 1800, this was the birth rate. In 1900, this was the birth rate. And in 2021, this is the birth rate. That's the distance along the line. You can create a graph, and you can see how it's high, and then it gets lower and lower and lower. That's the distance. But then we look at the curve, and we look at the slope of the curve, and that's the velocity. So it's changing at a certain rate over time. We can take the derivative and we can find the acceleration. How quickly is it changing over time? These are all mathematical models. If you're not familiar with them, then this will sound like a bunch of gibberish to you. If you are, then this will seem very natural and logical. That we should look at how is the Muslim world changing and what direction is it changing. And the Muslim world is changing in the direction of lower fertility, more social liberalism, everything that you have in the West, and it's actually changing extremely fast. And so the idea that Islam is going to save the West, well, certainly it could change the distance that we've traveled in this social progress, but it's not going to change the direction. It's not going to change the velocity. In fact, it might even speed the velocity up. As crazy as that sounds, introducing Islam to the West could even make us more socially liberal. Even though that sounds contradictory because Islam is supposedly more conservative, I believe that because Islam has been proven to be so malleable and so changeable because of its authoritarian structure, it's easier to change social norms when you have an authoritarian structure versus a libertarian structure based around localism. Islam seems to be very susceptible to authoritarian governments and strongmen changing the rules and the people not really having any recourse. Now you could say that's true for every culture, but I think it's especially true for Islam. So I actually don't believe Islam is a bulwark against social liberalism. Again, from my perspective, the right wing, to reframe this, to reintroduce the concept, the right wing is about monopolizing power in the hands of those who already have power. So the billionaire class, it's about the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and we basically have a total tyranny of the merchant class. That's the right-wing position. The left-wing position says we need to fundamentally, deeply change the system. We need to change the incentive structure. We need to have a society where we're not poisoning the air and water and then saying, but the real problem is these greenhouse gases. No, how about the real problem is the fact that sperm counts have dropped by 50% in the last 50 years. It seems like a little bit bigger of a problem. We can move from the coasts to inland. We can move up into mountains, but we can't reverse our decline in sperm count, right? That's a bit more fundamental. That's the poisoning of our bodies to the point where we can't reproduce. On that train of thought of the future and the future of the human race and our evolution and our biological changes, we will likely, in the next century, not just have artificial intelligence, but many forms of genetic science which allow for very rapid evolution, allow for a selective pressure, which could develop a entirely new race of humanity. And I'm not talking about skin color here. I'm talking about people who are faster and healthier and stronger and smarter than the present human race. Taken as Homo sapiens, we could develop a new species through genetic selection very quickly. And this changes the game. You know, this is going to be a situation where it's probably going to happen. And if it does happen, there's not much you can do to prevent it from happening. From my perspective, the positive of genetic selection is that it allows for the reintegration of humanity with our environment, because humanity has the capacity for language, and our capacity for language has allowed us to create novel environments that our instincts are not capable with. So our capacity for language allows for agriculture. Agriculture allows for a new diet. This new diet is not optimal for us. Even though it's efficient from a collective basis, we have all this grain, therefore we can have a larger population because we have more calories, more cheaply produced, centrally produced. We can settle an area. Okay, there's a lot of advantages, but also it causes cavities, right? When you switch from a meat and berry diet to a grain diet, you start seeing the appearance of cavities. So that's not good. It's not good that we have toothaches. But we could actually change our genetics so that we could change it so that we have teeth that are more like herbivores, or teeth that are more adapted to that. So we could eliminate cavities. Wouldn't that be great? What's more important really is the psychological component. So much of our lives are tied up in addictions, whether it is pornography, video games, gambling. Human beings are very susceptible to addictions. We're addicted to bad foods. We're addicted to sugar. Most Americans are obese. Europeans are becoming more obese. So how do we solve that? We could change our genetics that lead to these addictive pathways being formed, and we could reduce these. We already know that drugs such as LSD are capable of mitigating or even eliminating addictions by rewriting our neural pathways. Of course, when abused and used liberally, psychoactive drugs or LSD can also have negative impacts and can be addictive in themselves. People use them again and again and again without any useful purpose in mind. They just want to get high. That can be an addiction in itself. But it might be possible with genetic selection that we could help free the human race, or whatever would come next, the transhuman race, from these addictive pathways that would allow us to escape from that mental prison and move on to a higher plane of existence, psychologically or even spiritually. So I think there's some hope. Now, the caveat is there's a lot of bad things that could happen. You could call this what Heidegger might refer to as the instrumentalization. Now, of course, he was writing in German, so he wouldn't use that word. But he had this concept of enframing that technology makes everything into a standing reserve. It makes everything into a resource to exploit. And so humans could also be genetically selected to be the perfect worker bee, to just do menial tasks without questioning them, without having a soul, without thinking of a grander purpose. And so, there's a lot of danger involved here as well. But it's going to happen. We're going to have genetic selection. So the question is, what direction are we going to select towards? And that depends on who's in power. So if the merchants are in power, they're going to try to create a race of human beings who are good at making them money. Human calculators, perhaps. But if the warriors are in charge, we're going to get a race of people who are good at fighting wars and being self-sacrificing, being strong, being courageous, being heroic. If we have a priest class, maybe we're going to have a race of people who are good at seeking the truth, who are good philosophers, who are always asking why, who are good with language. So we could get different outcomes depending on the power structure that is controlling this process of selection, that's regulating this process. Right now, human governments have, with the exception of China, they've officially outlawed a lot of genetic engineering. However, we have recently, in the past year, seen various medical technologies come out which change human DNA. If you're in your head, if you're thinking changing human DNA, that's crazy, that could never happen. Well, it's here. It's happening right now. You probably know somebody in your family who has injected something into their body this year that has changed their DNA. We're living in the future, right? Genetic changes and selection, it's happening right now. So, you could say, well, we have to stop this. We have to turn back the clock. That's just not going to happen. Maybe you wish you wouldn't. Maybe you think it's a sin against God to change your DNA. It's happening right now. The question is, what direction should we push it in? That is the open-ended question, not whether it's going to happen or not. We don't have the capacity to stop it. You can abstain from it. You can say, well, I don't want to be part of it, but it's going to happen. And that's the future. So I'm not interested in races of people, because we're all, in very short order here, we're going to have new races of people. The question is, what will those races look like? How will they think? What will their purpose be? What will their class orientation be? So that's a big question for me. I'm not excluding the possibility of artificial intelligence, although I believe it is I believe that it's much easier to take a template that works, like human DNA, and to optimize it toward a certain task than it is to create an entirely new artificial intelligence. I think humans are already extremely creative and inventive, and there's a lot of genius in the human race, and I think that can be refined and expanded upon. I think trying to reinvent the wheel might end up being a pretty much worthless task in the end. I think we might find that you're getting more bang for your buck to simply change humanity than to try to do everything from scratch. That's basically I'm pretty bearish on the prospects of artificial intelligence, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's the way to go. Anyway, there's going to be a lot of changes coming in the future. Now, you as an individual don't have the capacity to stop any of this or to really change the world at all. The only capacity you have to make an impact is if you're part of a magnet. I like to use the metaphor of a magnet. The metaphor of a magnet is looking at the physical system of magnetism, that if you have a bar of iron, it's not magnetic. But if you align all of the electromagnetic fields within that bar of iron, it becomes magnetic. It gets a north pole and a south pole, and all of a sudden it exerts an electromagnetic force, and it can attach itself to other magnets and attract metal filings. And so now it has an impact on the world. So if you want to have an impact on the world, you have to be part of a community, an organization, a company, a tribe in which you are aligned with the other members of the tribe. Doesn't mean you're identical or the same, but it means you have a common telos, a common purpose. And what gives us our telos and our purpose across different individuals, I think, is mythos. I think ultimately mythic structures are contained within religions. We need to have a common religion in order to unite us. Now, as I said before, Christianity is crumbling. Maybe you think it'll come back. Maybe you think it's gone away. I think we should understand religious revolutions throughout history, and I think we have to consider and confront the question of religion. What is our religion? What's our mythic structure? Where are we going? What are we going to do? That is the central problem. I say that there are basically two ways out of our current situation, or two ways to get to a new plateau. One is through technology, one through religion. I essentially consider religion to be a social technology. So either way, you could say you're dealing with technology. But I'm not an engineer. I don't know how to create new technologies, but I do know a thing or two about religion. And so that's a question that I can engage with on this channel. And maybe you think that's interesting. You can engage with it with me. But I believe that whatever comes after Christianity and science and wokeism and all these things is going to have an ancestry in that direction. It's not going to come out of the ether. It's not going to skip all that stuff. It's not going to exclude it. We're not going back to paganism. But we're going forward into something new. And so we're going to have to figure out a way of uniting around a religious concept. Having a little cult, an individualistic cult where you have your own special little idea of God, I don't think that works. I think we have to balance two needs and two desires. One is the minoritarian desire for exclusivity. We have to be separate from the world because the world is poisonous. It has poisonous ideologies on the left and the right. It has poisonous foods, poisonous chemicals, poisonous addictions, poisonous social attitudes. We need to reject all that and remain separate and be distinct and special. But we also need to be able to cooperate. We need to be able to agree. We need to be able to come to compromises. And so we cannot be so individualistic. We cannot be so idiosyncratic. We have to have methods whereby we can come together and agree to disagree. We have to be able to mediate disputes. And so we have to balance these two needs in a way that makes sense for our current situation. I think that the right wing is filled with factionalism between the libertarians and the nationalists and the conservatives and the paleoconservatives. I'm not really interested in that. I think the left wing, as a religious movement, has always been better at dealing with the problem of factionalism. Now, from my perspective, most of the left wing has been hijacked by the billionaire class, which is a ridiculous situation to be in, but we have to be honest about it and say that's what it is. So I don't associate with the mainstream left wing, but I think that we're going to have to recognize that the left has truth on its side more than the right wing. That's why it's winning. Ultimately, the truth wins out. And when the right wing says things like, you know, live and let live, who cares what people do in the privacy of their bedroom? I say everyone should just figure it out for himself. That is a loser attitude. The correct attitude is we're right, we have the right ideas, and people would be better off if they lived our way, and we need to try to gain power. And that means we need to have a mindset that we have the superior moral position, and you know what? It should be imposed on other people. And if we have to step on other people's toes to make that happen, we're going to step on their toes. We're not symbolized by the snake. We're not symbolized by don't tread on me. We're symbolized by the angel who brings light to the world. We're symbolized as a chosen people. I think this is the correct attitude to have. I think this is the attitude that the left broadly has. I think it's been hijacked by billionaires who are promoting, nonsense. But I think this is basically the attitude of Jews and Christians and Muslims and Zoroastrians and really every successful religious group throughout history. Even atheists believe they're bringing the light of science to the world. They have truth on their side. I think that's the attitude that we have to have, a sense of objective truth. We're striving for the truth. We're striving for God. We're striving for good. And we are doing the best job that we can. And other people, frankly, they're not making the cut. They're not measuring up. Now, that's a pretty tall order to believe that you really have the truth and that you're doing it better than everyone else. But you ultimately need to have that confidence. You need to have that faith in yourself in order to exert your will over other people. And that is what is necessary. In a minoritarian competitive environment, you have to believe that truth is on your side. And if you don't, you should find the people who do. And if you believe that no one is the truth, then you're basically stuck in a form of agnosticism. We don't have time for that. We don't have time for agnostics. We have to believe that we have truth on our side. We have to believe that we have the best model of reality possible. Some people would call that a cult. You can complain from the sidelines that religious people are part of a cult. You can complain from the sidelines that other people are power hungry. That attitude is a loser's attitude. That's a complainer's attitude. We don't want to complain. We don't want to be dissidents. We don't want to be outside the system complaining about how the system is it's like a cult, man. They're like Puritans. No, we want to be the Puritans. We want to be the cult. We want to have the power. We want to tell other people what to do. We don't want to be told what to do. We want to tell other people what to do. We don't want to live and let live. We want to live and have other people live the way we think they should live. This is the dominant attitude. This is the winner's attitude. This is the attitude. This is the only attitude that has any chance of surviving. That we have the right ideas, they have the wrong ideas. Now, of course, again, there's a balance of this, of the specificity of your claims. Or am I going to claim that blue is the best color, and if you don't believe that blue is the best color, that you're an evil infidel and you're going to hell? No, I think that's silly. I think that's pedantic, and I think that if you engage in these little idiosyncratic, dogmatist arguments over the Catholic versus the Orthodox over the Protestant, and these sort of things, I find it pedantic. I think that ultimately we have to go back to Rome. And the Roman Empire preceded Christianity. And the Roman Empire, as much as Judaism created Christianity, the Romans created Christianity, as well as the Greeks. But Christianity was an imperial religion. It was a question of how do we bring together all of these different people in the empire. Previously, that had been solved through the Interpretatio Romana, which interpreted German and Egyptian and Roman religion as all being part of one big family. Well, the Jews kind of threw a wrench in that with their monotheism. So Christianity took it to the next level. I think that's the attitude we need. We need a form of religion which is capable of bringing together people from now not just a Roman world, not just the Mediterranean world, but the global community from America to England to Australia and all over. We need to have a single religion which is capable of bridging those gaps. Remember Paul's epistles where he says if you want to follow the Jewish rituals, you can do that. But if you don't want to follow them, you don't have to do that. If you want to keep kosher, you can. If you don't want to keep kosher, you don't have to. And so Christianity, as dogmatic as it was, and as ideological as it was, and as fanatical as it was, on many issues said, you know what, we're going to have tolerance. On many issues, you're going to have the choice to do whatever you want to do. So we have to have the ability to understand that effective religions are confident. Effective religions believe they have truth on their side. But effective religions also have spaces for tolerance. Effective religions also have space for diversity of thought and diversity of behavior. We have to decide what is important and what is not important. I do not believe, essentially, I don't believe that many of the structures of religion that people hold near and dear are very important. I don't think that a lot of the functions of the mass that people believe are very important. I don't think those are really the most important thing we have to deal with at this time. I think we're dealing with a lot more broad problems. I think it is useful to have a tradition. I think it is useful to have a standardized ritual. But I don't think that's the most important problem that we're dealing with at this time. Now, maybe that comes down to my personality type. But I can get along with Christians. I can get along with Catholics, Orthodox Protestants. As long as they can get along with me and tolerate with me, I can get along with them. I can get along with pagans. I can get along to an extent with atheists, even though I disagree with them. I can get along with a lot of people if we agree on what I think is the most important things, right? If someone is coming at me, whatever religion they are, they're coming at me with an attitude of they're ultimately buying into the religion of racial resentment, I can't deal with that. Because I think what we have today is a lot of people who put on labels, and these labels are false labels. They don't understand their own religious worldview. They don't understand their metaphysics. They don't understand their ethics. And so you'll have a lot of people who call themselves Christians, and they say, I'm a Christian. Well, to me, being a Christian means you hold Christ as the highest man in your life. Nobody's higher than Christ. And yet what you'll find is that these people will tolerate blasphemy of Christ, but they will not tolerate racism, sexism, transphobia, and whatever. So that tells me they're not Christians. It tells me they're not Christians in that if I go up and I blaspheme Christ, they'll say, oh, well, I guess we have a difference of religious opinion. But if I say something racist, sexist, transphobic, now all of a sudden they're telling me I should be in jail. They're telling me I'm a terrorist. Not that I say any of those things. It's just a hypothetical explaining that people are very confused. They don't know what their religion is. These labels are outdated. We're going through a transition period. And so what is important here is that we recognize what's going on and that we agree on the central problems, because it's only once we admit the problem that we're going to have any chance of coming up with a solution. So the problems are social poisoning, agricultural poisoning, dietary poisoning, spiritual poisoning, psychological poisoning, cultural poisoning. Everything that exists in our culture is a capitalist, consumerist, mercantile, billionaire plot to suck all the effort and energy out of the average person and to make their life revolve around consume product and give money to the merchant class through merchandising, through interest, through copyright. We have to recognize this is a problem. We have to recognize that those things which are necessary for our moralization, for our health, for our well-being, for our desire to survive, for our will to survive, not just, the basic necessities of life like food and shelter, but in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we also have to have a sense of satisfaction, of fulfillment, of higher purpose. So we need to be able to find these things. we need to be able to discover these things, and I think we're going to discover these things in each other. I think we have to have a radical view of life, which says that life is not worth living if we are not willing to sacrifice our lives for a higher purpose. That means a thorough investigation of what we're willing to do that for. And I think first and foremost, we have to be willing to sacrifice our lives for our families. Now, that becomes a very problematic topic because a lot of people have families who don't even agree on this principle. A lot of people come from families who don't care about family. Maybe you come from a family where you ask your grandparents for family photos and they don't have any. Maybe you come from a family that's been split up because of divorce. Maybe you come from a family that's small. Maybe you come from a family where people are not religious. Maybe you come from a family where people are individualistic. Maybe you come from a family where people don't trust each other. A lot of people come from families that have all these problems. And we have to find ways of addressing this, either through creating new families on better values and better principles, or by supporting the creation of families by other people. I do believe that divorce is essentially hereditary. Not in a genetic sense, but in the sense that if you're raised by divorced parents, you're very likely to get divorced. How do you break this cycle? Maybe you can't. Maybe you're destined to have a failed family. However, it is possible that you can support the foundation of a community which will reintroduce the family values necessary to create the conditions where people are willing to sacrifice their lives for one another, to love one another. And that's the purpose of our lives. These grand schemes that I have to create a new religious paradigm, a minoritarian strategy that will be able to break away from the poisons of the modern world and oppose the billionaire class through a deep left strategy, is all of that certain? No. Is victory certain necessarily? No. There's a lot of opportunity for failure. But what we can make certain is our ability to try, our willingness and our dedication to that victory. That is not something that is determined by external factors, which are outside our control. What's in our control is, are we going to put everything out on the table? And that could mean different things for different people. That could mean a financial contribution toward a community. That could be traveling across the country on a road trip trying to network. That could be working hard in college so that we can get a career where we're going to be able to contribute financially. That could be learning certain skills that we think would be useful, perhaps developing artistic skills. We want to become a musician, and we really want to refine our craft as a musician so that we can create propagandistic materials to promote our community. Maybe we want to become a visual artist so that we can moralize our community. Maybe we want to become a storyteller, or we want to assist in the creation of the community with explanatory materials or videos, right? So there's many different roles that one can take on in helping the creation of a community and helping the creation of a new religious paradigm. They may look very different on the surface, but the passion that animates them, I think that is that kind of love that animates that passion is really what we're all striving toward. Whatever form that it takes may be very different, but that is the central motivation. I think that's what we need to agree upon. Stop living our lives in a selfish way. Stop living our lives in a moment-to-moment distracted way. I think most of us have that passion somewhere deep inside our souls, but we hide it. We hide it because we're afraid of it. We're afraid of it because we believe we don't deserve love. We believe we don't deserve love because we believe we're bad people. We believe we're bad people because we're stuck in bad cycles. We're stuck in bad cycles because we've been poisoned. We've been poisoned, we've been imprisoned, we've been trapped. And maybe it's by addiction, maybe it's by loneliness. When you're antisocial, it breeds antisociality. When you're alone in a room for hours and days and weeks and months and years, and you come out of the room and you interact with people, it's awkward. And when you have awkward interactions, it's unpleasant, it's uncomfortable, it's negative. And what does that make you want to do? It makes you want to stay away from people because it's weird. And I think this is basically true of everyone. I think no matter how social you are, no matter how happy you are as a baby, or your genetic predisposition or whatever, if you're isolated from the world, you will become an antisocial person. They've done studies on sensory deprivation. And I think our social sense it's like one of our five senses, our sense of sociality. Our social intuitions. I think this is a sense that we develop just like we have our sense of hearing and sight and smell and touch and taste. If you put someone in a sensory deprivation chamber, it actually has the same effect that Alzheimer's has. It causes the death of brain cells. In the same way as if you don't exercise your muscles, you get muscle atrophy, your muscles die, and you become weak. I think if you don't use your sociality, it dies and it becomes weak. So I think in the same way, we all need to engage in some form of athleticism, no matter, and if you're a cripple, if you're in a wheelchair, that's going to look different from if you're, in the prime of your life and very healthy. But we all need to exercise our bodies. We all need to exercise our minds. We all need to exercise our sociality. So the internet, and especially people who spend a lot of time on the internet, oftentimes these sorts of problems become very prevalent. So there's a kind of selection bias in terms of who my audience is, and also what I talk about is biased towards solving problems. If someone is doing very well, if someone has a great job, a great career, a great family, everything's going well in their lives, I don't feel the need to speak to that person. I don't feel the need to give them a pat on the back. Maybe I would if I met them in real life. But when someone is doing very well, I don't feel the need to speak to that person. It doesn't seem like a pressing need. It doesn't seem very important. When someone is failing at life, when someone's doing very badly, I feel the need to try to help that person. And so that is the majority of what I talk about. I talk about problems. And some of those problems to you may seem insignificant. Some of them may seem easy. When you hear me talk about these problems, you may think, wow, this is a waste of time. Like, the things he's talking about, those people are hopeless. This, is useless. Just be a winner, don't be a loser. And I understand why people might come from that perspective. But that's not my perspective. My perspective is that the only thing worth doing in this life is solving problems. And we have to come to terms with the fact that the Western world, the first world, is the most materially rich and the most spiritually deprived and the most psychologically maladapted and emotionally stunted and socially weak. We have low trust in our institutions. We have low trust in our communities. Our churches are falling apart. We've got some real bad problems. And so when I see these Christian churches doing mission trips to Bolivia, I think that's an evil church. It's an evil church because it has, in my opinion, rejected the message of Christ. To me, the story of the perfume, that the woman offers the perfume to Christ, and the disciples, in their foolishness, as they are always showcased, much like the nation of Israel is showcased as the most sinful nation. It's supposed to be the chosen people, but the prophets are always saying Israel is the most sinful nation of all. In the same way, the disciples are always shown to be more foolish than some random woman. So this random woman comes up and gives Jesus this perfume, pours it on his hair, and The disciples say, oh, that's terrible. We could have sold the perfume, given it to the poor. Don't you know the message of Christ is all about, taking money from the rich and giving it to the poor? And he says, no, that's not actually what it's about. And so that, to me, that parable of the perfume is very important in terms of, the attitude of the Christian church toward trying to evangelize, building churches, building these schools, and giving people food and water. What we need is not this material poverty to be addressed. What we need is the spiritual poverty to be addressed. We don't need physical food and water. We need spiritual food and water. And that is what the Christian church has totally failed to address. It's totally failed to understand that we have a radical problem. We have the enslavement of the human soul, not of the body. Because the body is born, it lives, it dies. The body is whatever. But what's important is the soul. The body is going to die. There's nothing we can do to stop that, whether it's by starvation, by violence, by natural causes. It doesn't really matter. The soul does not need to die, but the soul can die. At least a little death. The little death of despair. The death of hopelessness. The death of complacency. The death of ennui. The death of loneliness. The soul does not need to suffer these things. These are unnecessary deaths. Whereas the death of the body is necessary, the death of the soul is not necessary. And therefore, the suffering of the soul is greater than the suffering of the body. Those who suffer in their body are more fortunate than those who suffer in the soul. Of course, you can suffer in both, but creating a dichotomy here, which I think is useful, to understand that really the first world has bigger problems than the third world. The third world, they're eventually going to have our problems too, because their fertility rates are dropping. They're eventually going to run into the same problems we have. But for the moment, the first world is the one with all the problems. The first world needs to be addressed. And the solution to these first world problems, I do not believe, is contemporary Christian music. I don't believe it's, you go into a service and they've got, the lights are dimmed low, and then they've got some strobe lights flying around, and then they've got the lyrics up on a big screen TV, and they're playing contemporary rock music, and they're singing about Jesus. I don't think that's the solution. I think that's kind of lame. I think Jordan Peterson is lame. I think much of our mainstream culture is lame. I think the problems we have are kind of extreme. And I think that the world that the merchant class has created is pretty ugly. I think it's intentionally ugly. I think it's a form of psychological warfare. I think that we need to fight against it with radical forms of beauty. And we need to use every tool at our disposal. We need to use art and music and whatever we can find from the past, great, but we also need to create new forms, contemporary forms. We need to use nature in its healing capacity and its ability to purify. Just like the plant can purify, can take out the CO2 and give us some oxygen. We can use nature as a form of psychological, spiritual purification. But our goal is not just to escape from the city and dwell in the nature purely, but it's to get ourselves to a point of health where we're able to confront society as it is, to confront society in its ugliness. We have to have a way of seeking authenticity and genuineness, and I understand why people feel a lack of that. And we're all frustrated. We're frustrated with each other's faults. We're frustrated with our own faults. But we have to agree on certain key principles. We cannot be individualists. We cannot continue to be lone wolves. We cannot continue to go our own way. We cannot continue to say, You know, you do your thing, I'll do my thing, in absolute, as a marker of our personality, as a goal, as a telos of who we are. We cannot allow these things to define ourselves, because these are deceptions. That's not how language works. That's not how humanity works. That's not how genetics works. That's not how the nature of the universe works. You know, we are not atoms. We are a collective, and we exist to love one another. That's why we're here. So we have to pursue that first and foremost. And whatever gets in the way of that, whatever is an obstacle to that, has to be questioned, put under scrutiny. And if we say it's a worthy obstacle, if we say, well, yes, when we prohibit X, Y, or Z, yeah, that's going to, stop us from having a human connection with that person. But if someone is a criminal, if someone's breaking the law, if someone's doing something really bad, we need to exclude them from the community. That may be necessary. But if it's on some foolishness, if it's on something archaic and outdated and no longer useful to us, then maybe we should discard that. But that has to be our motive. That has to be our purpose. That has to be the thing by which we judge it all. That's pretty much the introduction to the channel. I could go on, and as you watch the different videos, you're going to find them very repetitive. And when you watch the videos, you might get bored. I think after you watch a certain number of videos, you pretty much heard everything I have to say. I don't really have a lot to say. My hope is always that I introduce things succinctly enough and clearly enough that I give you pretty much all the tools you need in order to go on with your life renewed, inspired, and educated to the extent that you found your next step, whatever that is for you. Maybe your next step is a change in the way that you view your education, your job, your family, your religion, your life path, your goals, your attitudes, your personality, your psychology. It's going to be different things for different people. Some people, their family life is great and everything is in order and that's taken care of, but what they really need to deal with is their physical health. Some people, their physical health, they're in the top shape of their life. They're an athlete, but you know what? They don't really have any friends. Some people have tons of friends, but you know what? They really don't have any goals. They don't have a direction. They're not moving toward a community. They have a lot of associates and they go to parties, but they're not really rooted in an identity or a religion. They don't really have a religious life. So everyone's got different problems that they have to deal with, and I'm always trying to push people to recognize the problems. I'm always trying to connect the political to the personal, because I think when the political becomes too abstract in ideology, in right versus left on a superficial basis rather than a deep basis, that's when it becomes destructive. So to me, the deep left is about opposing the status quo, not as a superficial reactionary, but on a deep level. And that means going down into your core, whether that's a prayer to God, Jungian psychoanalysis, or whatever that means to you. I can't exactly tell you, but I do want people to think a little bit deeper, and I do want people to act. I do a lot of thinking, I do a lot of talking, but ultimately none of that is worth a single breath if someone somewhere listening to this does not do something. If you do not act, if you do not make decisions, if you do not change the way that you are living one iota toward the better, then nothing I have ever said means anything. It is all worthless. It is all a waste of time. It is all an exercise in futility. If you, yes, you, the listener, right here, right now, listening to the video, the introduction to the channel, if you don't say, I'm going to create a plan of action, not of thought, not of thinking, not of doubting and skepticism and all of that in itself, if it does not lead to a tangible, concrete, measurable change in my life that I can say tomorrow I've done something that I've been putting off, that I haven't done before, that I know I should do, that I've been avoiding, if you're not confronting that which is difficult and that which is hard and that which you are afraid of, then it doesn't matter. You might as well roll over and die. So that's the message. That's the introduction to the channel. I hope you enjoyed. Check out some of the other videos if you will. Maybe like, share, subscribe. You know the whole deal. We're trying to go to the top here. We're trying to get to the top of the charts. We're always trying to improve the channel. If you have ideas or suggestions, you can always hop over on Twitter. You don't have to be on Twitter. You just have to take the 30 seconds it takes to make an account. Mention me, not really message, the DMs aren't open, but you can mention me, I'll get a notification. You can follow me, I'll get a notification. And we'll start a conversation, and we'll take it from there. And I'm trying to recruit people. I am actively looking for an apprentice. If you're a jack of all trades, maybe you can fulfill all the different needs and desires that I have in terms of book editing and programming and collaborating on videos. Maybe you could do one of those things. Maybe you're a video editor. Maybe you're a book editor. Maybe you're a programmer. Maybe you just have ideas. Maybe you like to talk. Maybe you want to do a chat sometime. There's a lot of things. Maybe you're not ready to contribute. Maybe you just want to lurk. Maybe you just want to be part of the community. Maybe you want to have a low-key sort of text conversation. There's a lot of possibilities. We're growing the audience. Maybe you're not someone who wants to contribute, but you want to share the videos. That's useful, because if you share the videos, maybe the two of us can find people who do want to contribute. So there's a lot of things you can do. There's a lot of things I can do. Scripting of the videos, turning videos into transcripts, editing the transcripts, putting them in the book. There's a lot of tasks that need to be done now in the present. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done for the future. We haven't even started. The channel hasn't even started. We're basically baby mode at this point. We'll see how far we can take it. Eventually, the whole thing may come crashing down. That's always been my fear of why I should not invest too much in this channel, is because it could always be taken away tomorrow. I am not Susan. I don't have control of this whole YouTube website, so I am not at liberty to do what I want to do. I am under her lock and key. I am built on her foundation. So this is a, channel brought to you by Susan. She is, if you ask who we worship Susan. She's our goddess, our boss mommy, and that's the way it is. Sorry, I don't make the rules. Susan does. So, in any case, at this point, we just have to have the attitude of we're going to push this thing to the limit. We're all going to contribute the maximum of what we can. Please do not come at me with over promises. Please do not offer me a bunch of things that you're not going to follow through with. We all need to develop a better sense of integrity, honesty, loyalty, reliability, responsibility, where we're not going to offer things to people and then take that back. That's not what we're going to do. But I do want people to get in touch with me. I do want people to reach out to me and contact me. I do want to network people. I do want to connect people. I do want to build projects and groups and teams. And I've got a small audience. I'm going to admit it to you. I've got a little niche audience. But among my audience, I've identified people who are filled with potential. They're full and they're filled with potential. And these people are going to be leaders. These people are going to be influential, powerful, creative, inventive, extraordinary people in the coming decades. These are young people who are in the prime of their lives. They have the greatest potential they'll ever have. And I want to impact these people and help give them a sense of direction. Where there was confusion, I want to give them clarity. Where there was doubt, I want to give them certainty. Where there was loss, I want to give them growth. I want to help put them on that path to the point where they don't even need to watch my videos anymore, but that they can go on their merry way and make a positive impact in the lives of others, that maybe they can say, point other people in my direction, and the cycle of growth can continue. That my channel can be a stepping stone where people hop on it from one side of the river to the other. That this is not a place where you have to stop and dwell and stick with this channel forever, but that you can get out of it what you need, and then you can go off and do what you need to do. Not as a perpetual kind of recycling and constant, we just retread the ground over, and you have to listen, you have to watch every video. No, that's not what it's about. So that's the great ambitions of the channel, the big goals that we have. Obviously, people have a lot of problems with everything I've laid out, a lot of criticisms. We are trying to expand our horizons. We're taking a look at various things. I'm not really set up really to do a lot of things right now. I'm kind of a little bit on the go right now. But we may do debates in the future. I haven't really had too many challenges as far as debates, and I don't want to engage with the ghetto of right-wing extremism, people who always try to drag me into that orbit, because they are desperate for talent, because they don't have a lot of it, unfortunately. Not to say that they're all idiots. Many of them are more intelligent in some kind of technical sense. Maybe they have a higher IQ, but they're founded on very resentful principles, reactionary principles that I disagree with. If you want to learn more about that, I would say my greatest hits are top 50 right-wing lies. I think that's a pretty good video. We also have the left can't meme, the myth of the left can't meme video. We have top 50 leftist shower thoughts. So I would say those are probably some of my, and then top 50 minoritarians of all time. So if you use Google search those or search them on YouTube, those are probably my 4 best videos. I've got a bunch of others. People really like worm fork coconut. That's one that a lot of people like. But there's a lot of good ones. Some people mentioned the psycholinguistics of religion. I think that one's still up. So there's some good videos we've already made, some videos we're going to remake, some videos we're going to continue to remake and perfect and continue this rhetorical evolution and develop our skills. At this point, you may start to realize that the channel is mostly unscripted. The channel is mostly about rambling. The channel is mostly stream of consciousness. If you don't like that, I'm sorry. There are many other channels where people script things. I've tried to script videos. When I script videos and I edit videos, it adds about a minimum of 5 hours. Right now, this video is about 97 minutes. If I scripted it and edited it, it would make it about a 5-hour process. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And when I do that, people don't like it. When I spend 5 hours editing and scripting a video and I read out a script, people don't like it. Sorry, I'm just looking at the numbers, I'm looking at the response. People don't like it. So if you're one of those people who wishes I invested the time, how about you become an editor? How about you write a script for me? Until then, just don't watch. Channel is not for you. Maybe in the future it'll change. Probably not. But there's many other channels where they do scripting, editing. I just don't do that. That's just how we started the channel. That's how we've been doing it. Maybe we'll change that in the future. Maybe we'll read books in the future. I haven't read a book in a while. Maybe we'll get back into reading books. I'm liking what I'm doing right now. I'm meeting people in real life. I'm just loving it. I'm loving interacting with my fellow human beings. I just love people. I'm an extrovert who's been forced for pretty much my whole life to be an introvert, and I've never wanted to be an introvert. It's just something that's been drilled into my head that I had to be. I don't really talk about my personal life on this channel. If you ask me personal questions, I'll give you hints here and there like I just did. But I'm not going to make this into the 100% narcissistic channel. We are a little bit self-aware on this channel in that we admit that making YouTube videos is kind of a narcissistic thing. It's like, ooh, pay attention to me. I'm important. Listen to what I have to say. But at the same time, we're self-aware enough to understand that once you open that Pandora's box of using YouTube as a place to just, you know, regurgitate all your problems, personal problems, it ceases to be helpful to other people and it just becomes a pity party. And I don't want that, really. I don't really want that for the channel. Last thing, we're kind of getting to closing remarks here. Oh, another thing. People question me a lot. I guess these are like Q&A, commonly asked questions sort of thing, FAQ. Why the 80 likes per video thing? So I have certain problems with discipline. I'm not the most disciplined person in the world. It's something I have to work on. And sometimes I'll put out a lot of videos. And the problem with that is that some people will watch my channel every day, some people once a week, some people once a month. And if I put out a video every day or multiple times per day, a lot of people won't see it. And a lot of people see like spamming the feed, or people say I put out too much content. So for me, when I put a benchmark of like 80 likes per video, that's to help me not put out so much content that people can't consume it all. Because to me, that seems to be, there's a balance to strike between putting out too much content and then people can't consume it all and they kind of lose track of what's going on and become disinterested, versus put out a little bit here and there and then it becomes more valuable and it becomes more easy to keep track of what's happening. So that's the function of that. I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot of things I'm forgetting, but I'm going to end it here. Thanks for listening, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.